I'm Leo. I've been a recruiter for 10 years now. I've been in Finland for, that whole time. Basically, I've worked in a lot of different industries, everything from sort of gaming, SaaS. I currently work in defense. I've been consulting. I've done headhunting. So really quite a broad experience in that. And I've recruited for a lot of very, very technical roles. I've recruited for non-technical roles. I think the only kind of area I haven't recruited for potentially is legal, but that might be changing soon. So let's see what happens there. The reason, I guess, like the reason, Lydia, is that I was sort of suggesting as we have them side by side, is that that's often how I look at CVs when I'm considering them. I'll have a copy of the job description with my notes on one side and then the CV there. And I think what's going to be quite interesting about this session is that Um, there's always more to a job description than just what's written. There's a whole lot of understanding about kind of what experience needs to look like, and that's a lot of understanding between the hiring manager and the recruiter. So what we'll have to do for this session is essentially assume that the job description is sort of exactly that. So if it says, hey, like, for example, 10 years experience, we'll have to assume that that's like a really hard requirement for them. And I can dive into a little bit more about kind of what that looks like when we see that.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you a lot, Leo. I'm doing my best here, so let's see. I will now share my screen. I hope it works. And share, because we did it once and it was perfectly fine, right?
Yeah. No, we've done it before.
Yeah.
It's a tested method. Just got to remember how
Yeah,
to do
yeah.
it.
If I'm smart enough. I'm not
You are,
100%
you are,
sure.
you are.
Yes. Okay. You believe in me, but
Always
let's see. Can you see my screen
done.
now? So both a job description is here and a CV is here, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, let's start with a job description like always. It's a sales representative role and it's B2B sales. Because the audience haven't seen the job description, if Leo, because you read it, is there anything
Yeah.
that stood out to you? What do you think they are looking for in a person?
Yeah. So this is definitely more like a more junior sort of SDR sort of sales rep position. This is definitely for someone I think sort of wanting to break into sales. I happen to know the company that this is actually about. It's in quite a traditional industry, if I remember correctly. It's in sort of forklift trucks, and they collaborate quite a lot with, again, if I remember correctly, sort of like interior, like Finnish interior design companies. So really quite sort of heavy on this, or like the traditional Finnish industries. And I think what's really important about these roles is that they're finding someone with high energy, who likes meeting people, who's really quite organized, and who's really quite good at connecting people to other people. So if you reach out to a company and say, hey, you seem to be in the similar industry. Can I put you in touch with one of our more senior salespeople? And so essentially booking that meeting. And so as you can see from this, what you'll be doing, everything from sort of making presentations, because sometimes customers want some documents, some more information, um, talking to a lot of people, using CRM tools, so that you've actually got a list of people you've talked with, kind of what happened in the history there. And then obviously the expectations, all of no, there's nothing really surprising here. You've got clear communications. I mean, you'll need to be really quite clear. You need to be quite driven, quite direct with a lot of customers you're talking with. And I think what they want to see is someone who can just get stuff done. So at a high level, that's kind of what this is. And this is me as a recruiter kind of reading this job description. This is what I would see this role doing. I've recruited for roles like this in the past as well, so it's quite a familiar role.
Mhm. Thank you a lot for explaining that. And this is the CV we got for this role. Can you see it well enough?
I do, yes,
Okay.
yeah,
Maybe could you start with mentioning how exactly do you analyze CVs? How does your
yeah,
process look like?
absolutely. So when I'm reading a CV, I will usually have some hard red lines about the job. So, for example, if it's a sales role and we require sort of like that you've worked in a similar industry, if someone has not worked in that industry, obviously that CV is unlikely to be relevant for that role. Um, and usually what I do is I work top down. So I'm going to read the summary. I'll then go through the work experience. And what I'm looking for is essentially information in the CV that seems to match up with the job description. It doesn't have to be the same, it's like written the same way, but it needs to sort of like it needs to ultimately be the same thing. So, for example, if you're talking about business development and the job description is talking about sales development, that's fine because it's the same thing. But if, for example, the job is saying, hey, like, we need you to actually sort of be booking customer meetings, and you're talking about sort of like building out initial contacts with customers, those are not the same. So what we have seen with Tamanna, we've got a good summary. It's pretty specific, which is good. A lot of relevant stuff, supporting cross-functional teams. You mentioned that she actually has experience in stakeholder communications, which is always, I mean, that's really important for a sales role. You've got to be able to communicate with decision makers. Then we'll jump to her work experience. So obviously coordinated B2B virtual meetings, really, really relevant stuff. Obviously this is sort of between delegates and partners, but I think for this role, for a more junior role, that's probably fine because they're not looking for someone who's super experienced in this. And I think they even say in the beginning, we will actually train you in how to do it. So it's, like we're not looking for someone with huge amounts of experience. Um, then going down after the student ambassador, there's senior executive B2B sales and management, information systems. What do we got? Analyzing customer behavior, creating dashboards. This is all really relevant stuff. This is kind of the stuff that you're going to be doing in the background. So yes, you're going to be calling people. You're going to be doing a lot of cold outreach, and trying to book those meetings. But you also need to be able to sort of prove to your manager and your stakeholders what you've been doing. You need to be able to show a list of customers. You need to be able to show to those customers kind of what the company you're selling can do. So all of this is really, really relevant. Um, and then we've got at the bottom, what senior officer, sales and customer service. And there's a really interesting line here, which has achieved highest portfolio performance in Q2 2018. So this on its own sounds really interesting, but I don't know what it means. I don't know what the targets were. I don't kind of know what the quota was. So like at a high level, it's really good, but I would definitely want to ask more about that if I were going to interview. Um, so there's one big problem here, though. There's one thing that means I absolutely cannot move forwards with the CV based on the job description, and that is that the job description requires Finnish. It says fluent Finnish, and I don't necessarily know what the reason for this is. I don't know if it's the company saying fluent so they can filter out applicants. I don't know if it's because like you're actually going to be working with people who literally don't speak English. But if you do have a role where it says fluent Finnish and you're not fluent, I mean you can always apply, but it is often a filter that companies are using. And so in this case, quite literally because of that, we wouldn't if this was the job description, it was a high requirement, we wouldn't be able to move forwards with I wouldn't even be able to interview because it's one of those red lines that is just not met. And I think especially with industries like I think the where this role is with sort of forklifts, with sort of quite traditional industries, you will be talking with people who might not speak any English. If all they need to do is speak with Finnish people, like you might, it might be that you need to be fluent. I have recruited roles in my current company where we've required fluent Finnish, and that's because that role was going to be working with Business Finland, who refuse to speak in English. Just it's really weird, but they absolutely refuse. And so what it means is you need to be fluent because you're going to be talking technical details, you're going to be talking funding, you're going to be talking about some quite complex stuff in Finnish. And it might be that this company is absolutely fine to have someone who's got A2 level, but we don't know. And so on the basis of the job description and the CV, we would not be moving forwards. Literally based on that one line. Everything else is actually quite relevant, but just for that one line, we couldn't.
Thank you for explaining that, Leo. And working as a career coach with clients happens so often when everything is a fit except for this one line. Finnish is required as a fluent level language. A small
Yeah.
question before we move to the next role I have for you is, have you ever hired an international who learned Finnish for a sales role where Finnish is required at a fluent level?
No, not in my experience. I've heard it. I've heard it that it's been done. Usually, what's happened though is that, like, so for example, I've hired people who have not been fluent in Finnish. They have joined the company, they've become fluent in Finnish, and then moved into another role. But that sort of wasn't sort of a guaranteed path. That was sort of, they got the Finnish qualification, and the company was able to look at them and say, hey, actually, now that you speak Finnish and with all this other experience you now have, there might be this other opportunity for you. But usually, sort of, if a company needs, or if they actually need fluent Finnish or B2 or whatever level it is, they usually need that from day one. And it could be, I mean, for example, there are various security roles where the documentation is only available in Finnish. Like it's very specifically not translated into any other languages for security reasons. And so you I say like and say some companies will use, they'll just put Finnish there as a filter so they can reduce the number of people they have to deal with. But often, so there are certain roles where actually you will need fluent Finnish or whatever level they define from day one.
Mhm. And while I ask you another question, I will
Yeah,
try
please.
to I'll try to open documents. Um, so what happens often, a question I get often is, my Finnish language skill is at B2 level, and a company is an international company, they work in English. Why do they even require Finnish as at that level?
Yeah,
What would you answer?
absolutely. So it really depends on the role. Again, I've hired a role where we required B2 at my current company. Our working language is English, but with this role, the successful person would be dealing with, for example, renovation contractors. They'll be dealing with people doing inspections, that sort of thing. And so while the company language might be English, the role itself will require various levels of Finnish. Now, for this one, it didn't need to be fluent, and B2 is a fairly good indication that you don't need to be fluent. You just need to basically be able to hold a conversation, and you can probably learn the actual sort of Finnish, like the specific Finnish you'll be needing in the role. But I think the company usually needs to see that you have sort of the basic level needed, and then they can teach you the rest.
Hmm, thank you. And the second role is a mobile development role. What do you think is important for a company here?
Mobile development is such a, in a way, it's such a weird, it's in a really weird place at the moment because it's not just mobile anymore. It sort of it bleeds into other formats, it bleeds into other areas. And while it used to be that if you were a mobile developer, you could just be in sort of, you could just be kind of, working with, like, Java or something like that. They're now looking for people who've been working with testing, who've been working with UI, who've been working with sort of performance and that sort of thing. So it's often a really odd role with a lot of different skills that are needed. Now, with this one, the job description, I don't know if it's partial, but it's really odd because it's so short. I mean, for example, let's just jump to the you will succeed if you have some experience in developing mobile apps. To me, this is absolutely wild. I've never seen a job description like this because it's very, very unspecific. It's quite a broad category, and it could be that the company is really super happy to look at, people with kind of a really broad range of experience. Um, and I think really with the first line, that's the one I would focus on when looking at the CV, because collaborative and comm skills. I mean, I'll be looking at some of them when I'm screening, but that's actually probably more for the hiring team to look at. And a proactive attitude and desire to learn from colleagues. Again, that's something the hiring team I think will be actually assessing. So it's not something I can really look at. So some experience in developing mobile apps, and we've actually got the stack here. We've got React Native, TypeScript, Firebase, all this sort of stuff. Fairly standard stuff. Yeah, Swift and Kotlin, obviously. Um, you know, and I think what's interesting to look at here is that Swift and Kotlin are considered a plus. They're non-essential, whereas React Native and TypeScript, for example, are like hard requirements. So with that, let's go back up a bit because what is in the job description. Because what we're doing is we're looking at in this role, your focus is on developing modern mobile applications in agile teams. And what it's really saying here is again is kind of what I was talking about before. It's not just the development. You're going to be working with designers. You're going to be working with QA. You're going to be working with like data scientists. You're going to be working with a whole like host of people. And so I think what they really want to see is someone who is able to build stuff but can also get on with people. And there are some mobile development roles where all they want is someone who can code. You don't need to be good with people. You just need to be able to code and code well. This is not one of them. So let's jump to the CV for Krishna. This is definitely more of a junior profile. We've got two intern roles, and well, there's been 3 years of experience in Android development, and I'll go into that a little bit. I think for this role, you would probably be considered a junior, and I'll explain it as I'll dive into this. So, looking at the CV, we've got obviously GitHub link, which is excellent. I think a lot of hiring managers are quite interested in what developers have actually got on their GitHubs, especially if you're a junior. They are interested in your personal projects. They want to see what you've actually built with your training, whether your training is from university, whether it's from a boot camp, whether you're completely self-taught. They want to see your personal projects because it gives them a really good indication of what you're interested in, how you approach problems, and all that sort of stuff. And I think with this role as well, it is likely a bit more of a junior role. Again, just based solely on the job description, because there are no like hard years of requirement or ownership or anything like that. So with Krishna's profile, we've got the summary with which mentions some of the tech that's mentioned in the job description. We've got React Native, we've got TypeScript, all that sort of stuff, which is all useful because again, at a high level, you've clearly been working with the same tech. If we go down a bit on the profile, just so we can see, there we go, cool. We have two intern positions, one with Neutralizer and one with VS again, mentioning the same tech. We've got React Native, we've got TypeScript. Um, I think one of the questions that a recruiter probably will have in an interview here is like, things like have you used Firebase? Have you used some of the other tech? To my understanding, and I'm not a technical person, but to my understanding, if you've used React Native, if you've used TypeScript, you know, that's probably enough to kind of, get you actually working on the position. The other stuff is probably teachable. And then we have Android application developer for 3 years. Um, the reason I think you'd be considered is that while you've been doing it for 3 years, the description in the CV is quite basic. There's not a lot of specifics. There's not a lot of information about what you've actually done. So, developed and maintained an Android application using Kotlin and Java. I mean, super relevant to the job, but sort of what was the application? How many users? Like you need to give some metrics, some more information about it. Improved app performance, stability, and OS compatibility. Can you define those? Like when you talk about improved performance, how is that measured? Is that sort of loading times? Is that sort of user retention? Is that sort of, signups? If you can be really specific about this, it will really help show that it wasn't you sort of just contributing a couple of lines of code. It was actually you actually sort of being really, really integral to the improvement of this. Collaborated with designers and back-end teams. That's obviously super useful for the job description, which is good. And participation in code reviews, sprint planning, agile workflows, all really, really relevant. And then at the bottom, we've got a whole host of technical skills. This is all really good. I think like for this one, depending on the rest of the applicants, yeah, I would might probably invite this person to an interview. At a high level, they do seem to have the experience. Again, depending on what the job actually needs and my discussions with the hiring manager, that might that might affect it. But again, literally based on what the job says, the job description says, and the CV, probably yeah, you'd invite them. I would have a lot of questions though about kind of what you've actually been doing because because at the moment it gives me a really high level understanding of what you've been doing, but I can't go to a hiring manager and say yes, you should talk with this person. Um, because there are a lot of people, for example, who've improved app performance. What we want to do is find out kind of how you've done it and is it something that you can do again? Are you able to sort of deeply explain the process? That sort of thing.
Thank you, Leo. So basically, your verdict is depending on other applicants, you would move with this one to the interview stage, right?
Probably, yeah. As I say, at a high level, the experience is there. There's no requirements for language or anything like that. The tech stack matches the kind of what Christian has been doing seems to match with the job description. So yeah, probably, yeah.
Mhm. I have two very small questions here.
Please.
You mentioned that in the job description, they said that a person will need to collaborate with developers, designers, QA, data scientists, so on, product owners. How would you like to see that in the CV?
I mean, in a way, exactly as it is in this one. There's no real sort of good way to go deep into this because the thing is, the second we see this, we have more questions about it. It's going to be okay, great. Like, were you working with the leads? Were you working with the teams? In a way, like you don't know what the company actually wants to know. And so with something like sort of quite general terms like collaborating with people, you can only be general about it. Whereas something really specific like improved app performance, where there's a very specific metric for improvement, you can be specific about that.
Mhm. While I'm opening the third row, um, a question I have for you is, this person had 3 years of experience from India,
Hmm.
then they moved to Finland, and roles they had were intern level roles. How do you see that as a profile in general? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, the way I look at a CV is I look at the whole set of experience. Like I don't sort of titles are often the worst way to describe a role. They're the only way, but they are absolutely terrible because there's no consistency between companies or industries, that sort of thing. And so if I see someone who's been a developer for 3 years and has taken an intern position, my first thought is, well, that's probably what you've had to do because you need a role. Like there's no judgment in that. It's just sort of like it sucks. But if you need a role to bring in food for your family, that's what you need to do. I think what you can do in these situations though is in your summary you can say, look, like I actually have got all this experience and I'm looking to take on like a more senior role than I've had before. Because it just gives a bit of an indication to the recruiter that you are actually looking for to move up in your career, not just sort of maintain the current level.
Mm. Thank you a lot. And this is the final role of a front-end engineer. What have you
Yes.
noticed here?
So again, let's start with the job description. So this is quite an interesting company. There does seem to be the company probably does some things with compliance. I mean, if we're talking about trademarks, there's likely some compliance areas to there. And I think interestingly, they jump straight into the managing terabytes of data. So I think your role is likely going to affect quite a lot of people. So the role will quite likely have some fairly sort of high-end ownership, which is always good, which is always quite fun. We're looking for a front-end engineer to elevate the user experience of trademark solutions. In this role, you'll develop and architect sophisticated interfaces that make massive data volumes accessible. The key word here is going to be architect. And again, what this really implies is this role is not it's not a junior role. It implies at least that you're actually going to be managing and making fairly structural decisions about things. And again, user experience. So this is very much front end. This is not back end stuff. This is kind of what stuff actually looks like. So if we go scroll down, responsibilities and duties, end-to-end development, designing and implementing. Again, really pointing to not a junior role. There's a very interesting thing here, which is performing pair programming. To my mind, at least, this implies some element of mentorship. Because it might be that you get buddied up and that's kind of the system they use for developing stuff. But it does also, in my experience, mean that if you're a senior, you will be working with a junior. And so while you will be developing together, there is probably an expectation of teaching, of mentoring, that sort of thing. Another interesting thing there is it does say it's talking about sort of pair programming essentially to maintain high engineering standards. And so it could be some sort of paired code review where you have two developers who are sort of buddied together to do code reviews for each other. It's a different way of doing it. It doesn't necessarily change kind of how I read the CV, but I think it's useful to know if you're going into the role. And then the last bit here, autonomy, trusted to work in the best way possible with flexible working hours. Again, this is really, again, pointing to not a junior role. For more junior roles, it might be that you're going to be supervised. It might be that you're going to have, like more reviews, more mentoring. And if you're being given autonomy, again, it's a fairly good indication that you're senior and they kind of trust you to just do your work. Then we'll go to the essential. So React and TypeScript, really common for front end. I mean, potentially the most common at the moment. Solid experience with CSS, REST APIs, Git as well, which is going to be, I mean, I get that. And then the plus factors, I'm just trying to remember. Yeah, there we go. Okay, yeah. So what's interesting here is this is a front end role, but they are looking for potentially someone with experience with Node, which is a back end framework, Docker, which is containerization, and Scala, which is very much a back end framework. And I think the idea is that your work will probably be you'll be working with people who are working with those tech stacks. So if you have some understanding, it'll help you. It'll help you be able to work better with them, but it's not like you don't need to be an expert in them. Similarly, with familiarity with SQL and AWS, again, they're probably not looking for you to be an expert, but if you've used them before, it will help. It could be that everything's they're hosting on AWS. It could be that they're moving to it. It could be they're moving away, and they need someone who's still familiar enough with the architecture to make it make sense. And then Figma and the storybook. I mean, this is also really common, especially with sort of user experience. So let's jump to the CV. So Ioana, summary: 3 years professional experience building complex data-heavy interfaces. I like that because it's really pointing to the terabytes of data mentioned in the job description. Comfortable owning features end to end. Good eye for UI detail. Well, I mean, all of this matches the job description really. At a high level, this is great because it essentially you're kind of saying yes, I've in a way I've done this job and I can do the job. Skills listed. I think you can kind of list skills in a way any way you want on the CV as long as they're there. And I think especially for technical roles, it's quite important to list them just so that you don't have someone saying, "Oh, but you didn't mention TypeScript," when actually you've been using it. So this is, again, the skills are fine. Then let's jump to the experience. TypeScript, React, Next, Node, Postgre, Prisma, Docker, all good. Now, what have we got with the descriptions? Own features with high autonomy, scoping to architecture decisions. Again, all linking with the job description. Contributed to a subscription-based integration app used by thousands of paying users, helping grow monthly users by more than 6 times. That's a really good metric because it shows the work you did actually had real world impact. It shows that what you're doing is actually actually benefiting the company. So that's fantastic. I think one of the questions I would be asking the hiring manager definitely would be interested in is what do you mean by contributing? As in, were you just doing code reviews? Were you actually sort of building out the core code? Were you sort of maintaining it? What does that mean? And I think if you have space, it could be good to actually to add that. But I think that's fine on its own because you have a metric attached. You actually have something that says why you're good at what you do. Building a full stack document management app from scratch. I mean, always useful. And then the one below it, actually, I think is potentially more interesting. Full stack employee engagement app, bringing gamification into the workplace through a clean, intuitive UI. What's interesting here is this is the first real mention of front end on this CV. This is the first real mention, actually, of something specifically about the role. And so again, when we look at the contributed to a subscription-based app, amazing. What was your contribute? What was your contribution? Because a lot of this so far has been full stack. And while that's not a problem, if you're up against someone who has very specific front end experience, they're going to have an edge because they can talk much more specifically about the front end side of things. Now, it might be that they're happy to have someone who's more full stack and you're going to be focusing on front end. But what we have to do is we have to look at the job description as it is. Next one, built two internal admin platforms that replace direct database access with clean interfaces. Again, getting more into the front end side. Chrome extension, introduce testing suites, Figma, all good. Manage deployments across staging and production on GCP using Docker. So this is interesting. This is very much not front end, but Docker is obviously mentioned in the job description. And then using AI coding tools as part of the workflow to maintain quality and pace on a lean team. AI is the hot term at the moment. There's a whole discussion around that. And then the description below, full stack developer trainee. Again, the stack matches. Finish off the cohort and programming intensive training with real project work. So this, at least it reads something like a boot camp or something like Integrify or something like that. All valid experience. I think what you might want to do here is kind of mention, for example, a specific project that you worked on. So, built accessible, well-structured front-end apps. Great. What, like, can you name one? Can you give a link? Like a really specific link, like you can find the app here, like you find my repo. Develop RESTful APIs, authentication flows, wrote unit and integration tests, all really relevant for the job description, which is all good. And then the previous experience is obviously in financial controlling, in a way irrelevant for this role, but it really, like, really interesting. In general, I think it's fascinating when people want to change careers. I think it brings a whole host of really interesting skills to their next role. And actually, it's something that I like to dive into when I'm talking with people, especially if someone's changed careers, because I'm like, actually, like, talk to me about how your previous career is actually going to help, because it will. You have a bunch of skills, and especially in financial controlling, maybe you're actually really good at not necessarily like testing, but sort of audit. It might be that you actually have experience in sort of planning things really, really well, which will lead directly into development. We've then got personal projects, and this is kind of what I was talking about here. NutriPare, a full stack web app. That's fantastic. Barcode scanning, so a lot of quite interesting stuff. We've got a bit of probably computer vision in there, that sort of stuff. And then a browser game for practicing Finnish noun inflections. That sounds terrifying. I don't speak Finnish, so this is really quite frightening to me. In a way, it's great that NutriPare is here. I might mention it in kind of, I'm guessing it's the kind of the boot camp that you did. I might just mention it there, and you can even say see below. Because say for example, you have a recruiter who doesn't realize there's a second page. All of this is forgotten. Now, you know, we absolutely should, as a as a recruiter, always scroll down. But sometimes, we're humans, mistakes happen, and sometimes you just don't see there's a second page. It could be that, you get distracted, and then all you have is the first page. So I'd say I'd recommend at least mentioning at least one of those personal projects where you did them in your experience. Open source contributions is always interesting, always useful. This isn't something that's mentioned in the job description, but it is something that I know a lot of hiring managers are quite interested in. So I think this is very, very good to bring up. You might actually want to mention that you have open source contributions in your summary. Just in a way, I mean, it's just say, I've done open source contributions, that sort of thing, because it is interesting and it's not super common. Then we've got courses, all relevant education, and languages. So I think like with this role, it's a really weird one because on the face of it, absolutely, like there's a lot of experience. You've got 3 years. You clearly have built stuff. You've clearly done what the role is doing. What it will depend on is whether this company wants someone who is super focused on front end, and kind of that's kind of what they've done, and that's all they've done, or whether they're happy to have someone who's more full stack and wants to sort of shift their focus to front end. And so I think with this one, yeah, I would probably have a screening call with them, but a lot of my questions would be very much centered around what they've done that's front end. Like with all of the software development they've done, like what does that look like? How's it touched the front end? How like basically what has it been? Because it's not specifically brought up other than UI in the job description.
Thank you, Leo, a lot. Uh, One very small question I have for you regarding this.
Yeah.
I really liked the CV of Ioana. I'm sure that Ioana will have a wonderful career, like everything, the way you structure information, the way you explain what has been done. The worry I have is that at the moment the market is so saturated with professionals like software developers with 10 years of experience, front-end specific developers. How would that be like? How would 3 years of experience look if you consider the market situation now?
Yeah, I mean it's rough. The market situation, especially for junior developers, is really brutal. It's very, very tough. A lot of companies are, I think, trying to work out what they want to do with junior developers because you need to bring in juniors so that you can train them to become seniors, so that you have seniors in the future. But with, the economy being what it is, I think a lot of companies are looking at this and saying, well, like, do we have the funds for this? Is it, like if we need to build something, it's, in a very, very short term, it's probably worth bringing in a senior rather than a junior. But it means that, if you're a junior, you're kind of getting left out. And so what it means is that when you're applying for roles, you need to be really specific about what you've done, what you've built. You need metrics to show that actually, hey, I only have 3 years, but look what I've done at this point. I've actually done the role. I've got my metrics. I'm actually contributing, and what I'm doing has real value to the company. Like with the line about an app that what was it got six increased was it user was it increased user retention by 6K like 6 times or something like that. That's really good. But I think if you can go even deeper, if you can provide more information, more value, basically, that will really, really help you, especially in this economy.